Hello everyone. What happens when the woman Alex loves is left alone for just a few terrible minutes, and the first one to feel that danger is not her, but the baby in her arms, who suddenly begins to cry as if his tiny heart already knows someone is outside? If your heart still aches for fragile love that must survive fear before it can become a family, stay with me. By the time evening touched the farm, the peace around Tuna's house had already changed. It was the kind of hour she usually loved most, when the heat of the day softened and the air outside carried the smell of damp earth and leaves cooling in the dark. The curtains moved lightly with the wind. A clean bowl sat upside down near the sink. A tiny shirt she had washed that afternoon hung by the back door, not fully dry yet. Everything in that house spoke of small care, of ordinary effort, of a woman building safety with her own hands. One quiet task at a time. Henry had just woken from his short sleep. He was warm and heavy against her shoulder, one cheek still creased from the blanket, his little fingers resting weakly against the front of her blouse. At 1 year old, he still belonged almost completely to touch and instinct. He did not speak. He did not walk. He knew his mother by heartbeat, by scent, by the shape of her arms around him. And when she held him close, the world usually made sense again. Usually. But tonight, even before Tuna heard the sound at the gate, Henry's body changed. His small hand tightened. His head turned toward the front door. Then, without warning, he began to cry. Not the tired cry she knew. Not the hungry one. Not the fussy little whimper that came when he wanted to be rocked. This cry was sharp, frightened. It came out of him in broken bursts, as if something just beyond the walls had touched a fear too new for words. And outside, in the deepening dusk, someone had stopped at her gate. Tuna pulled Henry closer at once, swaying gently the way she always did when he was distressed. "It's all right," she whispered, though her own voice had already gone tight. "Mommy's here. Mommy's here. Mommy's here." Henry did not settle. His face pressed hard against her neck, then pulled away again. His eyes, still wet with sleep and tears, kept turning toward the door. His legs kicked once against her waist. One tiny hand clutched the fabric near her shoulder so tightly it almost hurt. That frightened her more than any strange sound could have. A mother learned the language of her child long before words arrived. Tuna knew when Henry was sleepy, when he was uncomfortable, when he wanted water, milk, or nothing more than the comfort of skin and breath. But this was different. Something in him had become alert before she had. Something had disturbed him first, and then she heard it again. A faint scrape of metal from the gate. Very soft. Too soft to be accidental. Tuna's eyes lifted toward the front window. The room seemed to narrow around that single direction. For 1 second she stood completely still, only Henry's crying moving through the house like a thread being pulled too tight. The phone was still in her hand from the call with Alex. He had told her to lock the door. Now with Henry on one arm, she crossed the room quickly and slid the bolt into place with her free hand. Then she checked the side door, then the back. Henry cried harder every time she shifted him, so she kissed the top of his head again and again, whispering nonsense comforts into his hair while her ears strained toward the yard. "Alex," she said softly into the phone, trying not to let the fear spill out too fast. "I locked everything. I'm getting close," he said. His voice was steady, but the sound beneath it told her enough. Engine. Speed. The clipped breath of a man gripping fear by force. "There is someone outside," she whispered. On the other end, Alex went silent for half a heartbeat too long. "Can you see them?" "Not clearly." "Do not go near the door." Henry's crying rose again, raw and breathless now. Tuna shifted him onto both arms and walked backward from the window. Her instinct was to keep moving, as if standing still would make her easier to reach. "He won't calm down," she murmured. Alex closed his eyes briefly as he drove. He could picture it too clearly. Tuna in that small house, Henry crying against her shoulder, the light fading, the road still too long. "Listen to me," he said. "Lower now, firmer. Take Henry to the inside room. Stay away from the windows. Keep the phone with you." Tuna nodded before remembering he could not see. "All right." She carried Henry into the bedroom. The little blanket on the bed was still crumpled from his nap. His toy lay on the pillow where he had dropped it earlier. The sight of those small, harmless things made the fear worse, not better. Innocence always looked most defenseless in a moment like this. She sat on the edge of the bed and tried to rock him. His tears dampened her shoulder. His breathing came in hitched, miserable bursts. Every few seconds, he stopped just long enough to listen, then started again. Tuna pressed her cheek to his hair. "Please, baby," she whispered. "Please don't be scared." But the truth was, he had given shape to the fear she was trying not to name. Outside the house beyond the gate, the dark figure had not moved away. Alex drove faster than he should have, the road blurring under headlights and rising dust. Every signal, every slow truck, every motorbike drifting where it should not, felt unbearable. He was no longer thinking like a careful man. He was thinking like someone who had already understood the cost of being delayed once and could not endure arriving late again. The details from the day sharpened cruelly in his mind. Dangers, or Hong, robbed in broad daylight. A masked thief too certain of his escape. A black car, then another black car near Tuna's house. The silent call. The gate. The timing. None of it felt separate anymore. And beneath that cold realization was something even more painful. He had meant to come to Tuna with tenderness tonight, with honesty, maybe even with the beginning of a future. He had been too careful to speak aloud. Instead, he was coming to her with fear in his throat and the possibility that his life had already dragged danger to her door. His mother's words returned to him again. "You should ask her to marry you." He had waited. And now she was alone. Back inside the farmhouse, Tuna heard another sound, this time not the gate, a footstep on gravel. Slow, deliberate. Henry gave a startled cry and clung to her harder, his whole little body tightening as though he could somehow fold himself back into her. Tuna stood at once. Her knees had gone weak, but she forced them steady. She looked around the room not because there was anything useful to find, but because panic always searched for action. Her eyes landed on the old wooden chair near the wall. She dragged it quietly across the floor and wedged it beneath the bedroom door handle. A small, helpless thing. Still, it made her feel less exposed. Then her phone lit up again. Unknown number. For one trembling second, she thought of not answering. Then she did, because the silence itself had become worse. "Who is this?" she said. "Nothing. Only breathing again." Henry whimpered. Tuna shut her eyes. "What do you want?" At first she thought the caller would remain silent. Then, very softly, in a calm male voice that sounded almost polite, came the words, "Stay inside, Miss Tuna. It will be better for the child." The line went dead. Tuna could not breathe. For a second the room tilted, not from noise, not from violence, from the unbearable intimacy of it. Whoever that was knew her name, knew she was inside, knew Henry was with her. She pressed the phone back to her ear and called Alex immediately. He answered on the first sound. "Tuna." Her voice broke this time. He spoke. Alex's grip on the steering wheel tightened so hard the muscles in his forearm locked. "What did he say?" She repeated it exactly. No exaggeration, no confusion. That made it worse. Alex felt something inside him go cold and focused. This was no random prowler, no thief looking for convenience. Someone wanted her afraid. Someone wanted her contained. And someone had chosen their words carefully enough to make sure she understood Henry was part of the threat. "I'm almost there," he said, but now even those words felt cruel. Because almost was not the same as here. The first hit against the gate came only minutes later, not loud enough to break it, just enough to let her know the person outside was still there, still testing, still patient. Tuna covered Henry's ear instinctively, though he was already crying too hard to understand what sound had frightened him and what terror came from her own body, holding him too tightly. She loosened her arms at once and kissed his forehead, apologizing in whispers he could not understand, but might still feel. "It's okay, my love. It's okay, my love. It's okay." He buried his face into her neck again. There was no one close enough to call for help except Alex. And even as she thought that, shame brushed through her for depending so completely on one name. but fear stripped pride quickly. In this moment, there was no performance left in her, no careful distance, no quiet pretending that Alex was only a kind man who came and went through the edges of her life. He was the one she wanted there. Him, only him. Another sound at the gate. Then silence. Then a low vibration from outside, like a car engine still running. Alex left the main road so sharply the tires spat gravel behind him. The farm road opened ahead, darker and narrower, flanked by trees whose shadows crossed the headlights in restless bands. His heart was beating too hard now, not wildly but heavily, like each beat landed with consequence. He called to Na again. She answered in a whisper at once. "I'm here. Where are you?" "In the bedroom." "Good, stay there." He could hear Henry crying in the background, exhausted but not done. The desperate crying of a baby who did not understand danger but understood his mother's fear. That sound nearly undid him. "Alex," her voice dropped further. "What if he comes inside?" He did not lie to her, not fully. "He won't reach you before I do." It was a promise spoken against distance, darkness, and uncertainty. He gave it anyway. At the house, the porch light flickered once in the wind. Through a slit in the curtain, Na risked one glance toward the yard. She saw only fragments. A slice of gate, the line of the path, dark movement beyond. Then, something pale appeared between the bars. A folded piece of paper. Someone was sliding it through the gate. Her mouth went dry. Moments later came 3 soft taps. Not on the gate, on the front door. Henry jerked violently in her arms and let out a cry so sharp it sounded almost soundless at first. A breathless panic before the wail fully came. Na stepped back from the bedroom door as if the tapping had happened right beside her ear. Tap, 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 tap. A man's voice followed, calm and low. "Ms. Na." Every part of her went cold. Don't make this harder. She could not move. The cruelty of those words was not in their volume. It was in their gentleness. Henry's cries filled the room. She held him tighter and looked around wildly as though the walls themselves might open and give her another way out. There was the back of the house. The small rear exit. The yard beyond that, but leaving with Henry in the dark, not knowing whether someone else was waiting outside, felt just as dangerous. Her phone trembled in her hand. Alex again. She answered without taking her eyes off the door. "He's at the house." "I know. I see the car." For 1 second, everything inside her stopped. Then she heard it. An engine outside, not slow now, but cutting hard into the yard road. Gravel tearing under tires. A car door opening fast. Male footsteps. The violent shift in the air when one presence of threat is suddenly met by another that is stronger. The voice at the front door disappeared. A second later came the sound of the gate striking open. Alex did not remember stopping the car. One moment he was driving, the next he was already outside, moving straight toward the figure by the porch. The black car beyond the gate had its lights off, but engine running exactly where Na had said it would be. A driver remained inside. The man near the porch turned once, startled not by being discovered, but by how quickly Alex had arrived. That was enough. Alex crossed the yard in a handful of strides and grabbed him before he could retreat. "Who sent you?" The man twisted hard, trying to wrench free. He was lean, hooded, face half covered and stronger than he looked. But Alex was stronger, and fear had burned the last restraint out of him. Inside the house, Na heard the struggle and nearly ran out before stopping herself at the bedroom door. Henry was trembling against her, exhausted from crying, his little breaths catching painfully between sobs. She could not leave him. She could not stay still. Outside, the second man in the black car opened his door as if to join the fight, then seemed to reconsider. Maybe the plan had never been meant to become a full confrontation. Maybe they had wanted fear, not witnesses. Maybe Alex's arrival had broken the shape of what was supposed to happen. The hooded man lashed out once, catching Alex across the jaw. Alex barely seemed to feel it. "Who sent you?" he demanded again. The man gave no answer. Instead, he looked past Alex, straight toward the house and smiled. Just briefly. Just enough. That smile told Alex more than words could have. This was personal. The black car lurched backward. The driver shouted. In the split second, Alex turned toward the vehicle. The man in his grip tore loose and ran for the gate. Alex went after him, but not far, because behind him, from inside the house, Henry's crying had suddenly changed pitch again, and Tunar's voice, strained and frightened, had cut through the night. "Alex." He stopped instantly. The black car sped away with the hooded man half throwing himself inside before the door fully closed. Alex turned and ran to the house. When Tunar opened the bedroom door at last, she looked as though the last 10 minutes had changed something permanent inside her. Her face was white. Her eyes shone with fear. She had not had time to cry out. Henry clung to her, damp-cheeked, hiccuping softly now from exhaustion. One tiny fist still twisted in her collar. For a moment, Alex forgot everything else. He crossed the room and reached them. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head once, but the movement was too small, too fragile. He could see the shaking in her shoulders and the hand still holding the phone, in the way Henry would not stop pressing himself into her chest, as if the safety of her body had almost slipped away from him tonight. Alex lifted one hand toward Henry, then toward her face, then stopped, caught between tenderness and restraint. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words came rougher than he intended. "I should have been here sooner." Tuna looked at him then, really looked at him, and whatever she had been holding together all evening finally cracked. "I thought he would come in," she whispered. That was all. Not dramatic, not loud. It hurt more than anything else she could have said. Alex stepped closer, very carefully, as though he were approaching something wounded and precious. He placed one hand at the back of Henry's head and the other lightly at Tunar's shoulder. "He won't touch you," he said. "Not again." The promise landed in the room like a vow he had not planned to speak tonight, but had perhaps been carrying much longer than he knew. Then Tunar's gaze shifted past him toward the front of the house. "There was something at the gate," she said quietly. "A note." Alex turned at once. Minutes later, with the yard checked and the road gone dark again, he unfolded the paper under the porch light while Tunar stood in the doorway, holding Henry. There were only 7 words written across the page. "You cannot guard them every moment." Alex read it once, then again. Behind him, the night had gone still, and in that stillness, with Tunar pale in the doorway and Henry finally half asleep against her shoulder, Alex understood the real meaning of the threat. This was not over. It had only begun.